All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have, as part of World Food Safety Day, we are presenting on internal auditing. And this is actually a topic that's pretty near and dear to me, as this is, a part of my background. I've had a lot of experience with this. And as you can see, we have myself, Joshua Elliott, and Rick Stokes, who will be presenting on this topic today. So thank you for joining. So just a little background about our presenters. So I am Joshua Elliott. I'm the district manager for our Ecolab food and beverage team in the Eastern United States. I reside in the Pocono Mountains in Eastern Pennsylvania. I have 15 years of experience within different roles covering sanitation, food safety, quality assurance. I've dived a little bit into research and development, and I also have certifications in HACCP, SQF, PCQI with the FDA, and internal auditing certifications as well. Rick Stokes is our area technical support manager for our food safety and digital consulting in the food and beverage division for Ecolab. He has 20 years of experience in food and beverage industry and has held multiple roles within quality, sanitation, worked with thermal processing, sanitary design, food safety in the laboratory, plant, and corporate settings for companies such as Nestle, Campbell Soup, Leprino, and Kraft. Currently, right now, he is leading our technical support team in the area of food safety and digital consulting. So a lot of experience there. All right, one of the questions, and as you can see, on the screen, we have a diagram, a graph showing automobile safety. And while we're not talking about automobile safety, I think this really applies directly into the concept of why auditing is important, and more importantly, why internal audits are important. And as you can see, the goal is various stages of continuous improvement. And as you can see from the graph, this starts back in 1960s when this data was first starting to be recorded. And the important thing to note is that these are fatalities per 100 million miles. And just keep in mind that currently, as a country in the United States, and we just looked at the United States, we drive 3.2 trillion miles annually, and we have a population that is 1.5 times larger than it was in 1960. And so as you can see, with different improvements and continuous improvement and we really want to hit on that, this is about continuous improvement. As you continue to improve on safety features and ways to prevent or minimize the impact of a collision, we have seen a very steady decrease in the number of fatalities with those new innovations and those new features within automobile safety. And so as you can see, just a few items, we have, 2-point seat belts all the way to tire pressure monitoring, anti-lock brakes, backup cameras. I know I use my backup camera a lot. So it's a very, very helpful thing. So keep that in mind, that this is about continuous improvement, and this is about always making things better. And that's really kind of the heart of internal auditing, is to see how you can make that improvement each time. So just some statistical items on foodborne illness. Now, these are annual estimates, and I really want to highlight that it is an estimate. As many times, what will happen is a lot of these cases will not always get, a lot of these foodborne illness cases do not get reported to local hospitals. And so we really do have to make estimates, because a lot of times people will have or experience a foodborne illness and just pass it off as, a minor flu or a 24-hour bug, and not go to the hospital, and so therefore it doesn't get, recorded. And so I would ask anybody to think about a time, or if you know of someone that has actually had a foodborne illness, had food poisoning, or anything like that. I know I have, and it is it is something to quite remember. I mean, you won't forget about it. I mean, it's you feel like your insides want to be on your outsides. So it's definitely a not a fun thing to go through. But like I said, most of these cases don't make it to the hospital, as people typically handle these things at home. So we do have to estimate, and some of these estimates are only recorded in a number in a specific number of locations. And so you basically take that data and multiply it, and that's how we get these estimates. And as you can see, only certain continents, only a few continents are actually recording these currently. We have Canada and the US that are recording those, Europe and Australia, South Korea. But we have a couple other continents that are just beginning surveillance or have no surveillance whatsoever. We have China and Africa that is beginning surveillance on these, foodborne illness cases. And so just looking at the numbers and locations where these are being recorded, we have, within the United States, 48 million cases, 120,000 hospitalizations, 3,000 deaths that can occur from foodborne illness. And these can come from several different resources, but especially within the food manufacturing, with, industrial manufacturing, we want to make sure that we're providing, safe food, and that we're not contaminating that food supply. And so just keep that in mind, that, really this is also about food safety, and we're trying to make sure that we are, doing the best thing that we can with the processes that we have in place. Now, with that said, just some history on food safety. Food safety principles have always changed, have constantly been adapting, going back to that concept of continuous improvement. As I stated earlier, with the automobile industry, the same thing has happened with food safety. We have all the way back to 1850 to 1875, we had this concept called the sanitary idea. And this was originally developed by basically, the government taking an interest in the health of the general public. And what that meant was, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, and also Louis Pasteur, which by no coincidence developed pasteurization on how to kill microorganisms in milk. This industrial revolution increased the amount of food that we could produce to the general public. And so there was a big focus starting on maintaining a sanitary state, or a clean state. This eventually evolved. We have in 1906, and this is just a brief overview. There are several different facets that go into this, but these are some major highlights. We have 1906, the founding of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, in the United States. This was when it was first founded, was in 1906. And then in 1937, it was officially formed. And this was to protect consumers from not only misbranded drugs and adulterated drugs, but adulterated food and misbranded food as well. Then we have in 1924, we have the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance. Originally, this was known as the Standard Milk Ordinance, and it was a regulation that was created to prevent milk-borne disease. So there were several different. It's also known as the Dairy Bible. There's a lot of specifics to how to produce milk-based products. And so there's a lot of outlines and details that goes into the PMO, or the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance. Then we have the 1920s to the 1930s. This was when sanitary design, and we had the formation of 3A. Many of you are probably familiar with 3A. This was the standard. This is basically setting a bar and a standard for how manufacturing equipment should be designed, and designing it for the purpose and ease of cleaning and being able to remove any of those soils that are on those surfaces, and get it to a thoroughly clean state. In 1948, we have the World Health Organization that was created by the United Nations. And this was to protect the health and safety of the population of the world, control communicable diseases, and to really start setting that standard globally. In the 1960s, many of you are familiar with the term HACCP, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. This was actually generated by a joint effort between Pillsbury and NASA. And originally it was, the concept was to protect food and food safety for astronauts going into space. And a lot of those principles are continuing to be adapted and utilized today. And we'll go in, I'll mention a little bit more about that later. 1986, we have Six Sigma, which originally was for business purposes, but the methodology was used to improve processes, just any type of process, by greatly reducing the likelihood of a defect or error. And as you can see, that direct application into food manufacturing. You know, we want as few defects, and certainly a foodborne illness would fall under that category of a defect. In 2000, we have the formation of GFSI, or the Global Food Safety Initiative. This was where we had the overarching concepts that directly apply to auditing schemes such as SQF and BRC, IFS, FSSC 22000. I mean, these all fall under, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And what the Global Food Safety Initiative did is there were several different requirements on audits, many different requirements from consumers, from customers, from places where you would get your raw materials from. And so they decided to put this effort together to form one recognized standard. And as you can see, for many of you who are familiar with these standards, you know that that these standards get updated on a regular basis. They're constantly being updated to a new requirement, and that's because of that continual evolution and continuous improvement on different food safety requirements or best practices that are being founded out in the industry. And so there's always that continuous improvement. Then we have within the United States, in 2009, we have the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, FSMA, and that was going back to that principle of HACCP. This now required any food manufacturing facility to have a food safety plan that was founded upon HACCP principles. And there was some evolution there as well. It was then evolved from HACCP to HARPC, or Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventative Controls. And so same principle, but a few different applications as well. All right, so just some key definitions here from multiple different sources. What is an audit? Now think about that. What is your concept of what an audit is? What is the purpose of an audit? What are you trying to do with that audit? So we have from the Webster's Dictionary, It's defined as a methodical examination or review of a condition or situation. From the Children's Dictionary definition, and the reason why we included this is because it really breaks it down basic, and it's to thoroughly check the records and processes of. From ASQ, or the American Society for Quality, it's defined as a planned, independent, and documented assessment to determine whether agreed upon requirements are being met. And for ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, it is a systematic and independent examination to determine whether quality activities and related results comply with planned arrangements and whether these arrangements are implemented effectively and are suitable to achieve results. So keep those definitions in mind, because there are several key words within those definitions that I wanted to call out. So one definition, we have systematic. This must be a predetermined method and an approach to auditing your system. You have defined techniques. You really have to define those techniques and how you're going to approach that audit. Independent, that means that the person or organization conducting the audit needs to be separate from the audit they are from the area that they are auditing. So for an example, a maintenance department would not audit the maintenance department. And so you would have another department within that internal audit, auditing another group. Documented. All audits need to be recorded. That includes any corrective actions, any preventative actions, anything that was done as a result from that audit, and those corrective actions themselves need to be recorded as well. Effectively, are the processes, keep this in mind, are those processes that are in place achieving the desired results? Are there any improvements needed? That's where we go back to those corrective actions. If there are improvements needed, what are they? Why do we need to make them? Let's change them, and let's make sure that they're implemented throughout the process as we continue. Comply. We are meeting those standards and expectations. So we have to meet those requirements of an outlined set of rules. So for example, customer expectations, complying with those. Federal agencies, local federal agencies, whether that's state, city, or nation expectations for those requirements, and internal requirements. That's very key. There are some internal requirements that your company may require you to meet. So just some different types of audits. We have first-party audits, second-party, and third-party audits. Now, our focus today, as I said earlier, is on internal audits, but it is almost a circle between what you see and how these audits all work together. So a first-party audit is an internal audit. That is an audit performed inside your company. And we'll dive into a little bit more on some examples of what those internal audits are in the next slide. A second-party audit is an audit performed by a customer on a supplier. This is an external audit. And a third-party audit is an audit performed by an organization other than a customer on a supplier or regulated entity. This can be used for your certification. So, and this is also considered an external audit. All right, just some deep dive into, or a little more dive into internal and external audits. So external audits are broken down into corporate audits or site audits. Now, a corporate audit, I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this. This is an audit that's conducted by your corporate team on their remote or satellite locations. These are company requirements. These are specific requirements that you must meet as part of that organization. Now, I want to, as I said earlier, a lot of these requirements can become circular, and many requirements that are part of internal audits can eventually make their way to external audits. As you know, as we mentioned before about HACCP, you know, that was an original principle started for Pillsbury, and then eventually it started making its way as kind of a best in class, and that this is the best way to do things. And so just keep that in mind, that eventually an internal audit could become something that you're required to do. And these are so some other internal audits is a site audit. This is where you're auditing your local site, where you are actually auditing your different departments to see that we are maintaining those policies and those procedures, and that if there are any defects, that we are making those improvements. Now, external audits, you know, as I said before, this is primarily about internal audits, but I did want to touch on those briefly. External audits are regulatory audits. These are governing bodies within your own country or even your city that will audit according to their requirements. You have GFSI audits, which are things like SQF and BRC. And then you have supplier and customer audits. These are customers that have certain requirements for you to conduct business with them and maintain that supplier approval. All right. Now, from here, I will transition over to Rick Stokes. Rick will dive even deeper into internal food safety audits and what those reasons are and how you can better prepare. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, Josh. And would you mind, so you're driving, excellent, that's what I was
Sure.
going to ask you to do. So what I want to talk about is more detail around the internal audits. Today, we're really focusing on what internal audits are and what they really can do for you. So understanding what an internal audit is supposed to mean and where are the components and what you can get out of it is really a goal. One of the first things I'd like to talk about is the reasons for the internal audits. You can have really two categories of internal audits. You can do an internal audit, and as Josh explained, the internal audit is you're essentially auditing yourself. You can do it for compliance reasons. There's some reasons out there where you have expectations or you have standards, or maybe you're looking to comply with something regulatory, but there's some guide for you already saying you know what's the expectation and you're just trying to meet that expectation. That's a compliance type of audit. I like to toss up the deputy sheriff, but it's not really supposed to be that type of relationship. Hopefully you don't get into a situation where people see you as a sheriff if you're doing an internal audit, because you really want to make sure people that you audit and people you work with in these situations understand the mutual benefit that you get when you identify opportunities for improvement, really. Then the other here is improvement specifically where you might not have these guidelines or these standards or the regulations as clearly defined, and you're not just trying to achieve whatever was written down in these standards, but you're actually just creating an open book opportunity to look at your process. And again, this is food safety focused, so we can look at anything that we think might be related to food safety and try to find ideas on how we can make that better. How can we make that safer? Maybe I'm looking for a best in class. Do you truly want to be a leader in food safety? If you're doing your internal audits just for compliance, you are likely not going to be able to achieve that leader in food safety status, because the people who are leading in food safety have to go beyond and create some sort of improvement or continuous improvement food safety internal audit to see whatever I'm doing today, how could I do it better? How do I make that step change? I'm trying to get to a whole new level, and that has been done successfully by a number of companies throughout the years. So Josh, next slide, if you would. Okay, so a little bit more description here around when I'm thinking about doing a compliance internal audit, or you could think of it system requirements. There's not really a set term that I found that is consistent with everybody on how they call or the nomenclature they use for these types of audits, but they really are asking themselves a certain number of questions or a set type of question, understanding what are my requirements and what do I have to review to know whether or not I met those requirements or those standards. And where is that standard? So those are questions you will be able to answer if you're doing a compliance type of internal audit. You will know your standard, whether it's internal or external, doesn't change whether or not you're doing an internal audit, even if your standard is like maybe my regulation, maybe I'm just doing an internal audit against the PMO because I want to know how close I am to complying with all the PMO requirements. It's still an internal audit because you're doing the audit on yourself, even though the source of the standard is external. Or some people go to another step and have internal standards where it goes beyond anything that might be out there on regulatory or an industry standard, and they have internal expectations and standards, and they can audit against those. So you'll understand that if you're doing a compliance audit. You'll know exactly which standards, or you should know which standards you're going to review. And the difficulty, something else that differentiates a compliance type of audit, is the difficulty is going to vary. Internal audits for compliance, will often use checklists, and some of them use scored checklists and things like that. But all you really are focused on is that checklist. Can you understand what's in that checklist? What is that question, or what is that box on that checklist really trying to get you to understand? And then where in the environment, where in the manufacturing site or process does that question apply? If you can understand that, then you can complete an audit of that style. Your personal background might not be in auditing or food safety or things like that, but you can train people with different backgrounds and things like that to be able to understand the standards relatively quickly. Now, are all of them easy to understand? No. Sometimes the questions out there for these food safety standards is a little bit more complex, or maybe the person writing it didn't write it very easy to understand. They wrote it a little bit with an expectation that you have a certain skill set going into it. So you might need a little bit of help. That's why I'm saying the difficulty can vary. But for the most part, they tend to be a little bit on the easier to perform types of internal audits. The other thing for this compliance type of audit, another characteristic, is the frequency that you conduct it. The best internal compliance audits are done pretty much continuous on an ongoing basis. There's something being audited most days of the year, or most weeks of the year for sure, where you're doing little parts of your process. Maybe you move around departments, maybe you move around functions, different ways, but the internal audit should be kind of continuous so that people that are working in that type of food safety environment know that this is just an expectation of everyday life here. There is someone checking. You trust but verify. That is a common term in auditing. Is someone will be there taking a look at what you're doing from a food safety standpoint. If not that pressure, but that presence is always there, then people become comfortable with that. That's what your goal is on the compliance type of audit, so that they're free to share things that they aren't sure about. So if someone's performing a job and they aren't sure about whether or not what they're doing is safe from a food safety standpoint, you'll have that presence there of someone that they feel comfortable with, that they can ask, I'm not sure about this. Can you help me out? Because you've been helping me in all these other areas, pointing out things that I might not have done correctly. So that's one of the benefits of that type of compliance audit, is that frequency. Next slide, please. some key features or the overview of what a compliance audit really looks like. What are the components? You will have an internal audit team. Really hard to do an internal audit without a team. Once in a while, you might get started with a single auditor, but honestly, because of the frequency here, you're going to need more of a team. And there's other benefits that I'll describe on why you have a team, but it's really beneficial to get different perspectives, different backgrounds will maybe think differently about a question or about a standard. So make sure you understand that this is going to be a team effort of internal auditing. And sometimes on that team for larger organization, you'll want to set up things that are like a hierarchy. So when you do have an internal audit team, where would those findings go? Where would that report up? Usually there's more of a compliance or a higher level auditing hierarchy, usually made up of leaders in the organization, but you want to establish some level of independence for that internal auditing team so that if I'm auditing, let's say, my boss, I feel very comfortable that if I do find something, that it's not going to come back on me as a negative. So as an independent auditor for internal organization, I'm going to feel like there could be repercussions if I point something out. So that can be part of that audit team as well, as you set up that where does the reporting structure go? Most of the time you won't want, if you make your internal auditing team people that are also part of the job, which can happen, people that are out there running the equipment can audit different parts or different departments, things like that, but you won't want them auditing someone that could have a direct consequence for them. Create that independence. I could go into more details there, but we would need more time. So the other next component here is a defined standard or target requirements. Internal audits for compliance, you have to have that standard. It could be multiple standards, so you can have more than one type of audit, compliance audit going on for food safety within a plant. You may choose to roll them all together. Maybe I want to put my GFSI, I want to do an internal SQF style audit, but I also want to audit for, like I mentioned, the PMO. Maybe I combine those together in one big checklist, or maybe I purposely keep them separate. It's really up to you and how you want to set up your internal auditing program. But understand when you go into it, make sure you know what the standards or the target requirements are. You will need this training program for our internal auditors, something that makes sure that the internal auditors understand the standards, so you'll spend some time walking through the entire standard, saying, here's what it means. I've put together many different types of training classes, talking people through each of the points in a standard so that there's very little interpretation. If you do your training well, people know what that standard is looking for. But the other aspect of the training that I don't see as often, but I would really encourage, is calibration on the scoring between auditors. So a lot of audits, internal audits as well, get some type of scoring, some type of system, even if it's just good, better, best, or if you do go into percentages or something like that, there's usually a similar type of scoring. When you have internal auditors and you have more than one, you have to have them calibrated to each other. You give them example issues that maybe pictures that you've seen in the past, or you just create scenarios, and you're getting the internal auditors to discuss that scenario and talk about the score they would give it and why. Would this be fully compliant, partially compliant? Is this a critical fail? Something like that. Or if they're using percentages, that's a 90%, that's 50%, whatever it is, spend time, make sure you set up time for those auditors to talk and calibrate between each other, and then have a lead auditor, or sometimes you can invite in subject matter experts, somebody who's an expert in that type of problem, to explain the severity of that food safety miss or that risk there, so that the goal is for them to score consistently. You also see the checklist. Checklist is very typical for auditor. I mean, when I think of an auditor, I tend to think of checklist, but it's a very important tool. It makes sure that you don't forget things because there are a lot of aspects of food safety. If you look at a major food safety program, you will see how many different things they cover. You need the checklist because no one, no matter how well versed, has all the aspects of food safety memorized. So rely on the checklist. It also helps you keep organized if you're going to break this up into multiple day or you're just doing little bits at a time, which is something I would recommend as doing just little sections of food safety at a time, not try to cover all aspects of food safety at once. Interpretation guide or auditor guidance. Look for these. If you don't, sometimes if you're using something like a regulatory reference standard, you can actually find published or at least available to the public the auditor guidance documents for like FDA or USDA. They will say, here's how we're teaching our auditors to look at these types of food safety problems. So look for an interpretation guide if it's something that's regulatory, because it's probably in the public domain that you can get a copy of and you can see exactly how to interpret things. But if you don't, and you're doing a good training program that talks about understanding the standard and calibrating and things like that, turn that discussion into an interpretation guide. That way you will be able to be much more consistent. People will understand what the scoring is, because if you're consistent in your scoring over time, the goal here for compliance is to improve compliance and see increases. Because if you see a decrease, I'm going to talk about corrective action here in a second, but you should take some sort of actions on decreases. Another thing is deciding on a compliance, how much of it are you going to focus on paperwork or a floor audit? So what do I mean by paperwork audit versus floor? Paperwork audits are when you're looking at any of the documented records, things that were created in the past, things that have happened in the past. You can go back to the last time you audited, generally, is when people will, what records are available or what you really should be reviewing in the paperwork, and you're just looking for consistency of application. Are they always recording temperatures? Are they always initialing that they did certain key steps, things like that. Now, that's different from a floor audit. A floor audit is kind of like what it sounds like, where you walk out onto the plant floor and you're looking for behaviors. You're looking for these activities that you're expecting, or maybe they're documented in an SSOP or an SOP or something in their food safety plan that says they will do this, and that's part of food safety. So you are trying to make those observations in the moment. Now, keep in mind, though, when you're doing your floor audit, that it is really a snapshot. It's very difficult to not think that because I saw this one time, that this is what happens all the time. There is something that I like to refer to every now and then when I have closeout discussions, when I'm helping people audit, or if I've done internal audits myself, is I say I have this thing called auditor's luck. And it is invariably, someone will tell me one of my observations during an audit that has never ever happened before. And the fact that I saw it when I walked out on the floor was completely unique. That was the only time it's ever happened. Because that auditor's luck, I say maybe that's possible. I don't immediately discount that. I don't say that's not true. You know, what are the odds of that because of that auditor's luck? Maybe I just have that lucky eye, that 1 in a million thing that happened, I was there for. Now, if that happens for more than one thing when I'm walking around, okay, I get a little bit more skeptical, but I do trust. And then the key is I point these things out so that we can talk about, well, even if it is 1 in a million, what would we do to keep it from happening next time? But maybe I wouldn't score them for that auditor luck, that 1 in a million observation that I saw. So documentation methods is also a key component here. You got to think about how you're going to record this, because it is an internal audit, so you will likely have a little bit more flexibility than an external audit. External audit, a regulator or somebody like that coming in, you're going to want to try to be a little bit more contained in how they record. But if you're an internal audit and people really understand that the benefit of an internal audit is to find potential issues and fix them, to be proactive, there's no adversarial activity here. It's each of us are doing things to benefit. So you will have a few more options. Typically, you could take some photo or some video. Video really helps with those observations over time, so it starts to blend that concept of a paperwork audit where you're looking at the past, and a floor audit, which is looking at the present. Video can help you look at larger sections of time rather than just that brief snapshot that you're standing on the floor. And testing is also something that you may or may not include in your internal audit for compliance. Maybe there's certain things that you want to test for. Maybe not pathogens, but there's all kinds of different types of tests that you can do to give you additional evidence on whether or not something is a food safety problem. So consider whether or not you want to include testing or the results of testing as part of your compliance audit. Whatever you do with your documentation methods, an important thing is to create some sort of action based off of it. Conducting a full audit, multiple day audits, there's nothing more disheartening as a person who has audited probably hundreds of plants at this point, where I come back to a plant that I start to walk around and it is very familiar, but not in a good way. It's familiar because they still have the same problems, because the action plan, the corrective action, the preventive action just was not completed. And the team agrees that this is a problem, this is a risk, this is something we want to address, but because they did not have a robust corrective action or preventive action plan that kept people accountable for what they agree to do, then things just fall to the wayside. Something else became more urgent. Some other important urgent matter popped up, and something that went to the back burner fell off the back of the stove, right? So it didn't get done. Making sure you have a robust corrective and preventive action program will stop that from happening. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk about the improvement style of audit. I'll talk to you about the compliance audit, where you have standards, you know what you're trying to hit. Improvement opens that up a lot more. An improvement style audit, a continuous improvement style audit, or I like to call them leadership audits. Leadership audits are really asking the question, what would bring me to that next level? Whatever I'm doing today, maybe I'm 100% compliant. Wow, I got a 100% on my SQF. Okay, I could do something better. Just because I can hit all the standard requirements from an SQF style audit or something like that, does that mean there's nothing I could possibly do better? That's a dangerous way of thinking, when other people around you that are competing with you, other businesses, might answer that question with a yes, I could do better even if I'm at 100%. That causes you to be left behind. So the continuous improvement, luckily, many manufacturers understand the importance of continuous improvement. I'm applying that mentality and that thought to food safety. So even if you hit 100% on a standard, have internal improvement audits that are looking at your opportunities to make a process, a food safety type of process, achieve a higher level, better than what you're doing. Is it difficult? Yeah, this one's a little bit more challenging, because you will need somebody who really is at that expert level of understanding. They really understand the intricacies of food safety in that process that you're evaluating. Or maybe they also need to understand the process. Does it have to be one person that does it? No, don't do that. If you can build a team, have them collaborate, have that team build up. Will your team be as big? I would not expect your team to be the same size for an improvement style audit as you would have for the internal audits that are focused on compliance, just because of that difficulty in getting people with the right experience and expertise together. You just don't have access to as many of those typically. Not unheard of, but just typically. And frequency. So frequency here, these are not always continuous improvement. I know it's in the word continuous. It's supposed to be happening all the time. But for food safety audits, my experience is that these are a little bit more intermittent, not quite weekly, or some people do things, compliance audits daily, a little bit every day, do Gemba walks or something like that. But these improvement style audits are, there's some events. Let's do a certain event over here, and we schedule people in to do a continuous improvement food safety event, and something that's been giving us a little bit of trouble, not enough trouble to shut down or something like that, but just a more troublesome food safety department or line or something like that. Schedule that event so that you make sure you have your experts available, you have the key people that will explain the process, and you get enough time to have people come up with the creative new ideas, because sometimes those take time. You want to schedule that a little bit more in advance and set aside specific times. Now, some of the sadder times that I've done the continuous improvement is for cause. There is no doubt that there have been times when food safety has forced an improvement, where there's been a major incident, maybe there's a recall, maybe there's something else that's pretty major, and you have to go look at a process that failed, and you have to get that process to that next level. Knowing that team, knowing the group that is designed or designated for these types of internal audits can speed that up. Because if you have to start from scratch and you haven't thought ahead on putting this internal audit, this level of internal auditing together, you're going to kind of be behind the eight ball, and there's so much pressure happening when those food safety incidents occur, you won't necessarily get the best result when you're scrambling like that. Give yourself time to plan, to put the team together, to have a process, which I'll describe a little bit more in the next slide. Have that ahead of time so that you don't have that added stress of figuring that out when you have this other food safety concern, this more urgent one. But for cause also is a reason that pops up. Next slide. So just like I did with the compliance type of audit, the improvement audit has key features or key components in here. You're going to need an expert, or honestly, when I did work on these style of audits, I really like to set up the expert and apprentice, because as we talked about how much skill it takes to do a really good job on these, you want to always have people learning, developing in the wings that are asking questions that they don't understand of an expert that does understand it. So if you can afford the resources and people are willing to do it, don't just have your expert conduct the improvement audit, but have an expert and a person designated as their apprentice who is there to really learn from the expert as well. We do things like that in Ecolab pretty often, where we'll have an expert, but then we're also that expert while they're doing the improvement, they're also teaching. Evaluation techniques, though, is very important. So you'll notice I'm not really talking about here's the standard that you're just trying to figure out if you're compliant to. No, you really start to have to know how to use different types of analysis tools, quality tools. Like when I go into these situations, here's a few names of some people that have put together some really effective or helpful ways of thinking about problems. So Deming, the Plan, Do, the Select Act, Plan, Do, Check Act, there's a few different versions of that, but it's a process for identifying what are you trying to solve, what types of problems you're trying to solve. Duran is another author I've used where he talked about quality by design. Ono is in lean manufacturing. Smith, Six Sigma. I think Josh talked about that in the history as well. So you're not alone. Even if you don't have that standard to go by, you have processes that you can lean on. You can use some of these quality analysis tools to help you. And the mastery of the target subject, though, is usually through an apprenticeship program and experience. So how do you know if you're an expert or not? If you look back and try to think of how often have you been involved in this type of problem, do you have some sort of experience? If you've rarely ever done anything like this, you're probably not ready for an improvement style audit. You need to get out there and have some experience with this part of food safety. Let's say we're auditing whether or not something is a very effective HACCP program or something like that, and you've never put a HACCP program together. You're not the one to invent the next version of HACCP or your company's next version, like how Josh talked about HACCP and then HARPC, the modification that was accepted from that. You really need to understand that core target first before you try to improve it. Because if you don't understand some of what is already part of it, then you won't have a good background on whether or not your changes are better or worse. Did they hurt things by changing things? So is it just a change to change, or is it truly an improvement? So critical thinking skills also key for this style of audit. Knowing how to critically think about something, take your opinion or your feelings out of it and use some, channel your inner Spock there. Do some critical thinking on whether or not this really is achieving something better. The training program for internal auditors doing this style of audit also looks a little different. What I would suggest is you have them get up to date. Read some publications on what in that field of food safety. Let's say they're doing something with food defense or something, whatever that field is, maybe sanitary design. There are industry associations focused on that topic. There's regulatory publications that have, created directives and different things out there around that topic. There's even academic study behind topics like that. You gotta become current because you want to make sure you're improving beyond what's already available. And if you don't know what's already available, then it's going to be challenging for you to do that. And ideally, if you start to understand that, you can spot some trends coming out of publications. Which way is food safety heading? So keeping current and understanding that you are a continuous work in progress as far as you need continuing education and practice. If you start to get out of the field and you don't have much experience, the last time you kind of dealt with, thermal processing or something like that was 10, 15 years ago, I would not suggest you jump right into a continuous improvement style audit until you re-educate yourself and get in there a little bit and practice that. So not every food safety expert is going to be an expert at everything because that's for this type of audit. But paperwork versus floor, same principle applying here when you're getting into an improvement audit. How much of it are you looking at the history versus how much of it are you looking at current? You got to think about what your goal is, and that will help you decide how much of it are you looking for historical versus current. Documentation methods, very similar, maybe a little heavier on the testing side, I would say. I would emphasize a little bit more testing. Testing can get rid of some of that bias you are bringing into any type of food safety analysis situation, and the testing can be a little bit more objective if you set it up correctly. And same principle here on the preventive action. Whatever you find, if you do nothing with it, then why did you spend that time doing the audit at all? Because something on a piece of paper somewhere is not a goal here. The goal here is to make an improvement, to do something with that information, with that knowledge. Okay, next slide. I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker because I am running a little bit long on my time here, or short on time. The audit steps, you can put this together, but there are a few key things that I like to call out to make sure when you're getting ready for an audit or setting it up, you understand some of the key components so you can make it run smooth. You have to plan. You got to start any internal audit with a plan. What areas, how are you dividing up the processes, the areas, what's your frequency? Deciding these things ahead of time keeps everybody on the same page, not just the auditors or the people to be audited, but also all your management. There's going to be a little bit of cost associated with this. If people are not on the same page or expecting different things, this is the stage that you set all those expectations. Once you figure that out, you put out a schedule. You need to make sure the right people are there at the right time. You may even choose unannounced. That's relatively unusual for, I would say, for internal audits. Usually because they are designed to be very beneficial for both the auditor and auditee, that they don't really have to be unannounced, but maybe you have a reason for that. Doesn't matter, you still have to set up the timing of it all. Make sure the people who are involved in the audit know when it's going to happen. Then you conduct the audit using audit checklists, just walking through it, making your observations, recording your observations, and then the last step there is the follow-up. Create those action plans. Also, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, though, is you have to do an effectiveness review. You're putting time, effort, and money into these internal audit programs. What are they gaining you? What are you getting out of them? Don't be afraid to ask that question and conduct an effectiveness review for your internal audit. Is it working? Is it actually improving food safety the way you focused and the way you wanted it to improve? So don't forget that is independent of here's the observations and we're fixing these things. That's different. That's a regular action plan. Don't forget the effectiveness review. Next slide. Other parting thoughts or final thoughts here are adaptation and differences between different types of products and categories. My example here is carbonated soft drink versus milk. I can't just go in and take an internal audit that's been great and successful for somebody making a carbonated soft drink and apply it directly over to a milk product. There's going to be some key differences in there. So when you are trying to find and define your auditing programs internally, make sure you account for differences between your business and what someone else was going to do. Requirements, where do I look? I could look for voluntary standards, especially on these compliance type audits, GFSI standards, state, federal governments, great sources for auditing. They've got all kinds of documentation on the auditing you can either use directly or adapt to your needs. Other companies, maybe you co-pack for someone, or maybe you're a supplier for someone else, and they have a great example. I know Yum Brands, there are many audits that I've looked at in the past as a guide to how I would conduct an internal audit. And Codex Alimentarius, great resources on where do I get the questions for audits, things like that. Next slide. All right, just wanted to bring it back to Ecolab a little bit if I have a few minutes here real quick. Areas of focus. So Ecolab, some of the things you'll see are activities involving for food safety internal audit. Something that can help you is all that service activity. Account managers do verification, training, subject matter experts are available in Ecolab for sanitation and food safety. We have products that are focused on solving some of these issues that pop up. 3DT, there's even a food safety pocket app that we're piloting in a few places that really just walk through internal auditing. It's based off of GFSI standards, but we have different products out there that are designed around helping, as well as we're trying to implement thought leadership, trying to attend the conferences, have discussions with regulatory industry organizations, even academic groups all around the globe to say, here's our best thoughts on how to make these audits effective or how to make food safety effective. Next slide. I think, Josh, this one's yours.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. So, as Rick was mentioning, there are several different resources that we at Ecolab have available. So, from a local level, we have the local account managers, district managers, and such that can, really assist, especially with that routine service that they're doing on a regular basis. Part of that is we can work on reviewing SSOPs, watching those procedures in action, making recommendations on improvements, things like that. Our account managers also work with a lot with action plans. There's always this, there's always goals that we can set, and really it comes down to a strong partnership between your facility and the Ecolab account manager. A lot of this will really succeed or fail based upon that communication. And so, as we have that strong communication between the two groups, we can really work together. We can discuss what are those requirements from a sanitation, perspective, whether it's your regulatory audits or your own internal audits, and discuss where you are currently, what your expectations are, and those account managers can even assist in those sanitation audits to discuss what they're seeing on a regular basis. And what this does is it provides that unbiased third party, that extra set of eyes that our account managers can provide and help you look at your overall program health within sanitation, and then even put you in touch and work with our SEAL team, our food safety, subject matter experts, and start you on the road towards an improvement style audit if you aren't already there, or continuing to make that that change and that improvement. And as Rick mentioned earlier, there is a lot of involvement that Ecolab has when it comes to these best in class resources, and a lot of involvement in making those style of improvements.
So I think this is the final slide before we see if there's any questions out there. But what do I do with this? Why were we talking about this? What are we trying to get you to think about? Internal food safety audits can help companies find risks and act proactively. Stop reacting to food safety. Stop waiting for the recall. If I never talk about another recall again, I'd be a happy camper. But if I could think about what I could do to prevent food safety, I'd love doing that all day long. Partnering on internal food safety audits helps more effective reviews. Josh kind of hit on that, where utilize people like Ecolab and companies working together can be much more effective than if we're doing our things independently and we're not communicating well. Making sure that food safety is part of the Ecolab service that we deliver. We have the capabilities. Ask us, get us involved. We'll definitely want to be part of that. And if there's more questions around food safety, reach out. There are some resources in sales. You have your account managers, technical support, food safety teams. There's a lot of us that want to have conversations with you about this. So please reach out. Next slide, I think, is questions.
Yeah, and Rick, I do want to point out also that as our account managers are continually improving themselves, that if they come across a question that they don't know the answer to, that is where we have the Ecolab team and the full scope of support for those account managers so that they can then find those answers. So just bear that in mind. So with that, does anyone have any questions currently? All right. Well, if you do think of any questions and you have any additional comments, please feel free to reach out on the Ecolab website. Feel free to reach out to our technical support team, or reach out to your local Ecolab account manager. So We really appreciate your time and thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.